Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, Achieving Target Outcomes for Product Launch, presented by Herspiegel Consulting. I'm Andrea Anderson, and I'll be moderating this webinar. Our speakers today are Jay Jackson, Partner, Market Access, Herspiegel Consulting, and Santosh Naik, Principal, Herspiegel Consulting. You can read their full bios on the left side of your window by selecting the Speakers tab. Just a few technical notes before we begin. The webcast is being streamed through your computer, so there is no dial-in number. For the best audio quality, please make sure your volume is up. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand within 24 hours after the event. Time permitting, we will follow the presentations with a Q&A session. Please submit your questions using the Questions and Answers tab on the left side of your screen. All right, let's begin. Jay, please go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Andrea, for the introduction. We appreciate your interest in attending the webinar today. Herspiegel Consulting provides commercialization, strategy, and implementation services within the biopharmaceutical device and digital space. And as a company, we have over 15 years of launch experience. And Santosh and I look forward to sharing our insights with you today. I'm going to, in terms of the agenda, we have 4 topics: launch landscape, launch archetypes, which I'm going to cover, and then I'm going to hand it over to Santosh, and he's going to cover planning for success and identifying and mitigating risk. So as we start with the first agenda item, we're going to go to a poll to begin with. And in terms of the polling question, the question is, what are your most significant challenges with launching your new product? So there's only going to be one choice, but the options are lack of resources, timing of FDA approval, potential complete response letters, manufacturing and supply constraints, competitive landscape, proving value, pricing and reimbursement pressures, or other. And so just to read those again, and if you're going to be able to pick one: lack of resources, timing of FDA approval, CRLs, manufacturing supply constraints, competitive landscape, proving value, pricing and reimbursement pressures, and other. And as the responses are coming in, looks like we're around, still have a few more to go. And again, just pick the one that's the most common. Okay, I think we can close it out. Oops. And looks like the most common was competitive landscape, reported, and timing of FDA approval. Okay, that's very helpful. And lack of resources was a close third. All right, thank you very much. As we move to the next slide, in the launch landscape, what I wanted to start with was the launch curve, and obviously product launch is critical for brand success. It's not an easy endeavor as landscape evolves over time, and if you can prepare well for an upcoming launch, then your likelihood of success is going to go up exponentially. When we look at a launch curve as we see here, our goal is to enhance the curve by starting earlier, by increasing the trajectory up higher and faster, or holding on to market share as long as possible. Having said that, there's a number of planned and even unforeseen obstacles that can get in our way and impact our success. Thus, we want to and need to start early on the commercial side to ensure success. We're already in these scenarios, these launch scenarios, we're already investing heavily on the R&D side, but we need to ensure that we have appropriate allocation of resources on the commercial side as well. I would say this is even more important today than ever before, given the number of first time new molecular entities that are being launched. There's more small and mid-sized biopharmaceutical companies launching products today. And in fact, there's been a threefold increase over the past decade of new biopharmaceutical companies launching their first product. Coupled with that, there's even also more experienced companies launching into new therapeutic areas as well. So they may have traditionally been in a primary care area, and now they're moving in more of a rare disease or a specialty area, or even oncology. Um, as we move to the next slide, here we're looking at the annual number of approvals over time. And we've observed the number of annual approvals increase over time, and especially in the last 5 years. When we assess pipelines, small and startup biopharma organizations make up 80% of the total development pipeline and 73% of late stage clinical research. There continues to be a trend for biopharma to launch their first commercial product on their own versus partnering or licensing. And the number of products that are launched by these biopharma companies have tripled since 2006. A number of launches are occurring in the same therapeutic area as well. One that comes to mind is immunology. We have a number of products that are being launched in that space. And a couple of factors driving launching driving this is launching specialty medicines is there's smaller patient populations. There's more targeted healthcare providers. It's requiring smaller commercial infrastructure as well. And there's also more commercial expertise available in the industry via outsourcing vendors. So again, companies are choosing to launch on their own for those reasons. Having said that, and despite the available commercial expertise in the industry, it's still important to find the right expertise to ensure success. When we look at the increase, as we look at the increased implications on approvals, naturally there's more noise for various stakeholders. And as example, from a payer perspective, there's more payers naturally to evaluate and plan for. But it's more than just the sheer volume. There's increased product complexity. There's increased product prices. There's more specialized patient populations to reach. There's just more complexity there. And all of this is reinforcing the need that we need to plan appropriately for launch success. As we look at fast track designations, more companies are successfully leveraging fast track designations to accelerate the launch of their products. And we're seeing an increase in the number of requests as well as the number of approvals. And the result has been increased competition with compressed timelines. And as shown on this slide, we've also plotted out the number of rare disease approvals as they're increasing, and we're starting to see more competition in the rare disease space as well. And the implications for all of this in terms of fast track designations is, as I mentioned, increased compressed timelines for companies to prepare and successfully execute launches. Scenario planning becomes more critical to ensure organizational readiness and increasingly dynamic and competitive markets. And faster approvals demand nimble and well-coordinated teams and appropriate funding for a successful launch. To complicate the launch process, we're also seeing a significant increase in the rate of complete response letters by the FDA or from the FDA. And there's been a 300% increase in the rate of CRL since 2018. And halfway through this year, almost half of the NDAs have received a CRL. If you look into this a little bit further, the letters are almost evenly split between clinical and quality concerns. So the FDA has been seeking additional information from in clinical trials regarding scales to the efficacy endpoints. And also the supply chain is naturally becoming more complex, and addressing issues in the chain have been more complicated. So one may think that it's more driven mainly because of remote review records or missing facility inspections, and actually that's not necessarily the case. And this is affecting small and large pharma, and although one doesn't want to anticipate or expect a CRL, you do need to proactively scenario plan in case that happens. So, beyond the increased approvals and compressed timelines and uptick in the CRLs, resource constraints are a real issue. Resource constraints may be due to limited budgets, decreased headcounts, or difficulty finding the right talent to launch products. And I mentioned competition earlier, but even in traditionally protected areas of oncology and rare disease, there's environmental challenges that require more sophisticated marketing and execution. Other factors include pricing pressures, rebate expectations, and payer management control that will challenge profitability expectations. Again, all this equates to challenges for launching new products, but the challenges can be overcome, and we'll discuss how and as we move forward with the presentation. So, as we talk about launch archetypes, before we jump into some examples, I want to spend a minute to describe what they are, how it can provide a practical framework for tailor and launch activities. And in the context of pharmaceutical product launches, archetyping allows a brand to segment pipeline products based on their profile as well as market patterns and behaviors. And over the years, there's been different ways to frame this information, but the goal is to ultimately to understand how differentiated the product is with respect to how developed the market is. And obviously there's more layers to this as well. We're calling it high and low, and defining high and low is in the eye of the beholder. But to keep it simple for the purpose of our discussion, let's look at product differentiation and market maturity on a 2x2 matrix. So starting with market maturity on the x-axis, and that's you can see it listed at the top, going from left to right. A market that's undeveloped is one that's obviously less mature, is one that has less disease state awareness. Guidelines may not be developed. Patient advocacy has yet to be established or influential, whereas a more mature market has increased awareness and likely due to existing therapies on the market. As we look at product differentiation on the y-axis, a product with less differentiation may have a similar clinical profile and route of administration, and thus being less differentiated. A product that is more differentiated or well differentiated may be a new molecular entity that affects a different receptor to treat a specific condition. So it's more differentiated than anything on the market right now. So how do we use this matrix? And we'll combine the differentiation and market maturity into quadrants. And we can use this framework to tailor launch activities in a number of ways, some of which include positioning among competition at launch, determining potential market access restrictions, prioritizing current product against the portfolio, creating evidence plan to differentiate product. So we have a polling question, our second polling question for you to answer. And as it comes up, so the question is, for your next product, what archetype does your product fit into? So well differentiated in a mature market, minimally differentiated in a mature market, well differentiated in an undeveloped market, or minimally differentiated in an undeveloped market. And if you don't have a product that's going to be launched in the next 6 to 12 months, then pick one that is most common, one that comes to mind, or one that you recently worked through. So again, the categories are well differentiated in a mature market, minimally differentiated in a mature market, well differentiated in an undeveloped market, and minimally differentiated in an undeveloped market. And I'll give just a few more seconds. Okay, let's look at the results. And looks like it's pretty evenly split. with the most common being well differentiated and undeveloped market. You would expect a product will be more differentiated coming out on the market to be able to address an unmet need. But interestingly, that we have all four pretty evenly split, and I'll cover those as we go forward. I'll cover those right now. So, starting with the bottom left of the framework that we mentioned earlier, that I mentioned earlier, low differentiated product in an undeveloped market. General goals here are to look at avenues to differentiate, have a compelling education and marketing to drive adoption, and be sensitive to price. And it's important to look at the various stakeholders that we have listed here to ensure success, to minimize risk. The stakeholders are patients, providers, payers, and internal is the internal company. And from a patient perspective, in this category, we want to make sure that we identify patient advocates to help build support, building a patient, and that's to do that. We want to build a patient influence base, invest in patient support programs, copay programs, direct to consumer advertising, invest in data to identify the appropriate patients. For providers, we want to engage influencers and early adopters that can help create urgency to treat. And with that, we want to leverage KOLs to amplify scientific narrative, consider partnered investments in disease awareness campaigns, shape guidelines to expand reach, build access materials explaining path to product. And from a payer perspective, we want to engage payers early to align to the market size and need. And we'll do that by building robust pricing scenarios to balance access, market risk, financial return, optimizing contracting rebates to secure favorable access, and comprehensive evidence generation as well. And then from an internal perspective, we want to evaluate and act on other points of differentiation as well. A product that falls in this category that comes to mind is a product called Hetlios. Hetlios was a product that was approved in 2014, and it was approved for non-24, which is a sleep-wake disorder for people who are blind. And the product's a melatonin agonist. We all know melatonin's been on the market as an available over-the-counter product for years. Hetlios was FDA approved, and I'm not sure if you recall, but there were a number of commercials that were related to non-24. In fact, as it was the 2 years after approval and upon launch, the number of commercials aired were more than 12,000 in the 2-year span. So the company certainly focused on advocacy around the patient. They also leveraged KOLs from a clinical perspective. However, the product was priced at $450 a pill, and you take it once a day. So that equates to around roughly $160,000 a year, which is presumed to be for prescription melatonin. So I think some things were done correctly in their strategy and their tactics were done correctly, but certainly some opportunity to improve with pricing and with payer access. And as you can imagine, with a price like that, there was and there still are a number of formulary restrictions. The company does have existing sales, but looking at the full gamut of stakeholders, believe that they could have done better with their launch and their expectations. So, second category, just move from left to right. We'll look at product differentiation. Low product differentiation, enter in a mature market. And I'd say this is probably the most challenging category to approach. We want to create a differentiation beyond what's already known or thought to be known. And we want to identify specific patient profiles, be aggressive with pricing, contracting, potentially build a better patient support program. From a patient perspective, or when we go through the stakeholders, for patients, we want to define any differentiated benefits and provide best-in-class experience. And we do that by focusing on efforts that are highly receptive patients, focus on highly receptive patients through segmentation or targeting, invest in patient support programs, similar to what we described before. From a provider perspective, identify patient profiles to drive adoption by creating positioning messaging to find points of differentiation, KOL engagement and advocacy. From a payer perspective, want to develop a compelling pricing and contracting strategy early. That's usually key from a payer perspective, and do that by building robust pricing scenarios to balance access and market risk, and optimizing contracting and rebates to secure favorable access. And I'll give an example, but building and supporting an evidence generation plan can be important in this category too. From an internal perspective, we want to align forecast to market and commercial efforts to market position. And in terms of a couple examples, biosimilars come to mind, but I think that's too easy of an example. I'll give the example of Aimovig. So in 2018, Aimovig was approved for migraine prevention. So there were 3 branded products that were approved within a 5-month window. So we already had treatments on the market. This is for prevention, and there were already I categorize mature because there were already treatments being used for prevention, but the low differentiation comes in because there were 3 products that all came out within a 5-month window, and Aimovig launched at a considerably lower price point than expected, and they captured the majority of the migraine market from the beginning and outperformed analyst expectations. And Santosh, I don't know if you have anything to add. I know you're very familiar with that example.
Yeah, with the migraine example, it's interesting that while 3 new assets were launched within that space in 2018, payers utilize and understood those products to have very low differentiation and really treated those products as commodity products. And the products and companies that really won in that space were companies that had very aggressive pricing and contracting agreements with payers and PBMs in the 2018-2019 timeframe. And so while those companies thought they were launching a very differentiated product into a new marketplace that hasn't had an approved product within the migraine space in over 10 years, it was a very challenging access environment for those companies as they launched their product in 2018.
Yep. And then another example that falls in this category is Paxil CR. So Paxil was a product going generic. It's an SSRI for depression, and it was a once daily product. And the new product was Paxil CR, which was the same product formulation and a once daily formulation. So no differentiation, very mature market. There was already generic products on the market. And in fact, the generic version of the immediate release was about to be on the market. GSK took a different approach, and I mentioned evidence earlier. They started early to create evidence around the product. So in the clinical trial data, there was evidence that it was patients. There was more tolerability, better tolerability for the controlled release version. They utilized real world data to be able to support that, and ultimately real world evidence to be able to demonstrate that patients stayed on therapy longer. So they stayed on. It was better tolerable. It was more tolerable. Stayed on therapy longer. Then that improved outcomes over time, and in fact, it improved costs. So product was more costly than the generics out there in the immediate release generic formulation, but it prevented more resource utilization. It prevented resource utilization down the road, and they were able to demonstrate that from a brand perspective. So it was pretty impressive what was done. So next category is the high differentiation entering an undeveloped market. And historically, there tends to be a lot of opportunity in these situations. We want to ensure that we're focused on disease awareness, demonstrating the need for treatment, and how the product will address the current unmet needs. And from a patient perspective, we want to increase awareness and interest for seeking treatment, build compelling treatment narrative, cultivate patient influencers, support policy coverage shifts. And then from a provider perspective, we want to create an urgency to treat with sufficient access so providers feel comfortable prescribing. And we do that by leveraging KOLs to amplify scientific narrative, invest heavily in disease awareness campaigns to establish unmet need, shape guidelines to expand reach, and build access materials explaining path to product. And from a payer perspective, we want to create a clear story of unmet need, target population, and financial model to drive success. And do that by characterizing the unmet need, like I mentioned, ensuring product coverage, and creating real world evidence or HEOR evidence to demonstrate value to various healthcare decision makers. And internally, we want to define and act on early market shaping activities by developing strong training platform, ramping up field teams as access and the market matures, and even considering avenues such as pre-approval information exchange to engage with healthcare decision makers to educate and shape the market. Sovaldi is a product that comes to mind here. Was a game changer for the Hep C, the hepatitis C market. Prior to market introduction, patient side effects for the previous treatments were almost as bad as the actual virus itself, the Hep C itself. Gilead increased awareness at the patient level and the provider level, and the clinical benefits were obvious for the product. It's debatable, I'd say, on how payers were engaged because it's often used as a case example, and there was a lot of backlash on the price from that perspective. But the clinical effectiveness was so powerful for them, it proved beneficial. ICER, which is the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, reviewed Sovaldi in 2014 and agreed with the clinical benefit, but they also suggested the value the value is low due to high costs and prevalent population. They were able to overcome that, and to be fair, engagement with payers at that time prior to launch was not done as much as it is today. So pre-approval information exchange wasn't around then, but they did address the other stakeholders pretty well. And then the last category I'll cover is a well-differentiated product in a mature market. And general goals here to demonstrate how the product is different. We've established that it's different, and now we need to prove it. So how it'll still meet an unmet need in the market. And so from each stakeholder perspective, from a patient perspective, we want to facilitate a seamless path to product, build robust educational, financial, and general onboarding support, build patient advocacy engagement. From a provider perspective, we want to communicate a clear value proposition and position easy access for the product. So creating strong position in clinical messaging to emphasize differentiation, and build robust provider onboarding support materials to streamline path to product. From a payer perspective, we want to demonstrate positive patient outcomes by linking pricing strategy with clinical data, messaging benefits relative to standard of care, building and executing evidence plan to support differentiation. And internally, we want to ensure a team has sufficient resources and frequent reach to key stakeholders. A product that, to me, fits in this category is Rybelsus. Rybelsus was the first oral GLP-1 for type 2 diabetes. And obviously, there's been a number of medications for type 2 diabetes, oral, non-oral. There was injectable GLP agonists on the market, but this was the first oral version. And Novo demonstrated a need for KOLs or two KOLs with evidence supporting the benefits of the oral GLP-1 agonist. And they also for patients, they create a seamless path as they demonstrated the new and improved version with data as well. So that's a product that I view fits in this category. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Santosh to cover the next two sections.
Thanks, Jay. For the next two sections, we will discuss the key elements for planning for launch success and identifying and mitigating risks as teams prepare to launch a product. We as a firm have identified a number of critical elements that would maximize commercial success for a launch. Many of these elements are fairly obvious, But every asset needs to have a strong backbone in science, and having a strong scientific story is a critical stepping stone to reaching your launch objectives. From there, building a clear and aligned go to market plan is a critical element of the process. The go to market plan encapsulates and details how your organization will engage with customers, those customers being payers, providers, consumers, to really convince them to prescribe, utilize, or pay for your product. Part of that go to market plan, which is inclusive of your marketing strategy, is the element of having an early and consistent market shaping plan for your asset, especially based on the archetype of your asset, as Jay just discussed. As part of a go to market plan, you will also need to have realistic assessments of payer coverage at launch, as well as conduct a competitive assessment that clearly illustrates who you'll be competing against when your product is on the market. These aspects will define your strategy and planning for the launch and ultimately shape the forecast you build for the product. The final two elements on the left speak to the planning required prior to the launch. Building a clear launch plan and establishing a strong governance structure that ensures multi-stakeholder engagement and clear tracking and execution of deliverables as you progress toward the launch are critical to ensuring your product is approved on time, as well as critical in terms of ensuring your team is prepared to launch in a competitive environment. All these elements, if done right, will maximize the opportunity for your asset to be successful. So we have another polling question. This question, and I'll read it here. When is the right time to start launch planning? 6 to 12 months before expected launch, 12 to 18 months before expected launch, 18 to 24, or 24 to 36. I'd be curious to understand the audience's expectations around planning for launch. Okay, getting some 12 to 18, some 18 to 24, 24 to 36. Okay. So a vast majority of you say 18 to 24 months. We have some folks responding 12 to 18 and 24 to 36. My response to this answer would be 24 to 36 months. However, as you'll learn in this presentation, each launch is unique and really customizable to your organization situation. And we'll discuss planning and the urgency around planning over the next few slides. So for the go-to-market plan, we recommend using a where to play, how to win, and how to execute structure. I'm sure many of you have seen this structure before, but our go-to-market plan is a detailed framework to build strategy, develop plans of action, and execute all elements of your plan throughout the commercial readiness phase. The where to play section augments your understanding of the market, your customers, and the customer journey for products within the therapeutic area. The how to win section details out your target product profile, your brand vision, the positioning and brand strategy, and ultimately builds your forecast, which is linked to your strategy. The how to execute provides an overview of the pull-through required both with your field-based teams and other tactics and infrastructure to execute on your brand strategy. The launch plan provides the structure and governance to ensure the team is on track as you progress through the launch to approval. Some parts of the go-to-market plan is informed by primary research with customers or secondary data analysis, while other parts are built as an activity that your internal teams would lead. All of this information would be linked to your assets and company strategies. It typically takes on average of 9 to 12 months to build a full go-to-market plan with a corresponding launch plan, so getting this process started early enough is critical to your asset's success. In addition to starting your go-to-market plan in time, a robust planning timeline will enable your team to both accelerate and de-risk your launch. As you can see on this slide, each cross-functional team starts work at a different time point relative to your asset's approval. For each phase illustrated, your plan needs to be appropriate to your organization's situation. Plans typically gain detail as you progress through these phases. However, this timeline should align to the previous slide and provide your team enough plan and direction to help inform strategic decision and spend planning. As commercialization nears 36 to 24 months prior to approval, more detailed plans will help ensure appropriate market shaping and insight development is happening at the right time. In the past 3 to 5 years, I've also seen market access actually shift to the left on this slide and be a more critical component of your new product planning aspect as teams prepare for launch. Jay, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
To be planning for those critical data elements that will ultimately support the value down the road.
Okay. Finally, a launch is truly a cross-functional effort. To achieve your launch objectives, an integrated approach is essential. All your work streams, owners, and interdependencies need to be identified. Many of the work streams highlighted on this slide, label development, marketing, supply chain, org readiness, requires decisions across a number of cross-functional teams and owners. The importance of having a strong governance structure in place and executing that structure throughout the launch period to facilitate both engagement and transparency across your teams is of utmost importance. One note, the go-to-market deliverable typically involves all functions and requires the most cross-functional input and senior leadership oversight. So I can't, again, reiterate again how important that is within your planning timelines. Okay. The last aspect of achieving your target launch outcome is both being able to identify and mitigate risks. Unaddressed risks can either delay or diminish your launch performance. We as a firm have identified a number of risks that we have seen to be problematic for our clients. Those risks span all functional teams, including regulatory risks related to discussions with the FDA, as Jay mentioned earlier, supply chain or manufacturing issues delaying a launch date due to no or insufficient supply at launch, or a team delaying market development activities to conserve cash in a marketplace that requires it. Many risks can affect if the product is approved or if a product is a success once on the market. Once a product is on the market, market access, marketing, and sales risks can impede the launch growth curve we discussed earlier as well. For smaller organizations launching their first asset, the infrastructure risks are typically greater. However, due to resource and budgetary challenges, I've seen those risks be minimized, which may cause issues when the product is on the market. On this next slide, we outline a number of common risks across teams that can hinder a product's launch objectives. We've seen clients be affected by one or multiple of these risks listed, which have caused issues for a product or an organization as it prepares and executes a launch. As Jay mentioned earlier, the FDA has been more conservative in their reviews and has had issues reviewing a full submission package in time by a PDUFA date. Clients have received CRLs for items that previously were discussed and rectified in the review period. You must take note of this, ensure your submission package includes all of the relevant details required for approval in this environment. I've also seen supply chain be a key concern recently, including risks of clients using a single source API or a manufacturer using a facility that had never been certified for GMP, which have caused significant delays. Ensuring your supply chain manufacturing process is ready for pre-approval reviews and ready for when the product is on the market is key for any product launch. As I previously mentioned, market development risks, including delaying market shaping, can really affect the speed with which you can motivate a market to accept a new technology. It took significant market shaping within a variety of categories that Jay discussed earlier, obesity, wearable insulin pumps, to gain adoption for those products. Now, as we look at connected devices and prescription digital therapeutics, we'll see a similar need to prepare the market for the value of the product, which moves me to access and the importance of aligning value to the product profile. I'll pass it on to Jay to speak more to the access-related risks that we've seen with clients.
Yeah, just real briefly, from an access point of view, the team really needs to align on product value early. That has a pricing element to it as well to ensure that there's appropriate evidence. What is that evidence needed? What needs to be generated and what needs to be developed as a part of supporting that value. And I'd suggest in general teams understand that early evidence is needed to support a product and it'll ultimately help with your value argument. Like I said, to support price down the road.
Great. Thanks, Jay. So for all of the risks on these slides, we have identified a number of mitigation strategies that you can implement to reduce your risk exposure. These five core risk mitigation strategies illustrated on the slide include building out your core team early, identifying the critical functions that are key to launch success, and bringing on top talent with launch experience early to leverage their valuable insights. Maximizing agility and flexibility by finding partners with extensive commercial launch experience is also valuable. The team should seek to gain early insights into the marketplace, understanding the competitive environment, treatment realities, and reimbursement landscape. This will help ensure the right insights are leveraged to foster launch success. And gaining these early insights includes an early investment in data, which will help foster a deep understanding of the market within disease areas, guiding your positioning, your value prop development, and targeted engagements as you build your go-to-market plan. All organizations strive to be an agile organization, and for a launch, it is of utmost importance. There's so many elements you need to pivot around, and having partners who have been through this before, ensuring you can leverage that experience to make decisions quickly, will give you the agility and flexibility you need to navigate through the myriad of things that you will have to adapt to during the launch phase. Investing for success, leveraging your understanding of the product's potential to develop a tailored go-to-market approach and work to raise sufficient funding to meet the needs and potential of the product. To raise sufficient funding, a fully developed go-to-market plan with a dynamic forecast is critical to gain confidence with prospective investors. And finally, monitoring and rapidly adjusting, ensuring that you're tracking internal activities and monitoring relevant markets to identify issues as they arise or deviations from the expected launch trajectory, and really empowering your team to resolve them rapidly are all very important elements to risk mitigation. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list, and each organization and product is unique and may have other ways to mitigate risks. However, following these guiding principles will help ensure you are monitoring and mitigating your risks as you prepare to execute a best-in-class launch. So this is our last slide, and we'll take questions after this, but I wanted to speak to the key takeaways to ensuring your launch asset success. As discussed, commercial launches are increasingly complex with accelerated timelines and stringent regulatory reviews. The following elements should be considered to ensure you're ready to reach your launch objectives, and they include understanding your product archetype so you can guide launch planning activities, which should typically start 36 to 24 months prior to launch. Building a go-to-market model and launch plan based on your team's experiences and expertise will lead to a greater chance of success. And part of that go-to-market plan is developing and building a realistic forecast to ensure attainable launch goals. Identifying risks and developing a corresponding risk mitigation plans creates a path to overcome unexpected obstacles as you progress through the launch phase. Building out a strong cross-functional team and governance structure to track, monitor, and communicate effectively across teams, and removing the silo effect of a launch will ensure nothing falls behind or ensure that there's no misalignment amongst the team during the launch phase. And finally, we always advise our clients to ensure you have an experienced commercial team that has experience and expertise in launching products. Having launch partners who have this experience and expertise in this space will also increase your chance of attaining your commercial forecast, which ultimately will meet your launch objectives. So with that, I want to thank you all for your attention, and I wanted to alert you to a commercial readiness scorecard that Herspiegel Consulting is offering first-time clients. The scorecard is a complimentary analysis of your organization and marketplace. We can deliver a high-level situational overview and recommendations to help you really begin your launch planning efforts. And with that, Jay and I can take any additional questions you have in the time remaining.
Thank you so much for those presentations. We will move on to the Q&A now. There is still time to submit your questions using the questions and answers tab to the left of your screen. We have a lot of great questions already, and we will try to get to as many as possible. For the first question, you mentioned planning for launch 36 to 24 months ahead, but we have a narrow market for a specialty product. What is the risk of waiting until we get our trial data to start commercial planning?
I can I can start, and Santosh, you could add on. But so from my perspective, if you wait, then you're going to be condensing timelines down the road, and for everything else, and risk of not fully addressing key elements for success. I mentioned the various archetypes, and for each of them, they had an element of education and even market shaping. And if you wait too long to engage, then something may be missed, and you don't want that to happen. And and engaging healthcare decision makers along the way is going to help inform data. I mentioned data earlier a few times, but it's going to help inform data that's needed to reduce barriers and inform, maybe even inform endpoints. I gave the example of the Paxil example where they looked at the trial data to inform, but if you're early enough, you can actually inform endpoints in your clinical data too that are driven towards success measures that decision makers will be looking at down the road. So you want to be able to create endpoints and data that will be ultimately used for decisions versus doing it in a vacuum. And so earlier the better from my perspective. Santosh?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think the risk also, if companies, especially smaller biotech companies, are looking to fundraise off of clinical trial data, having information related to the where to play, how to win, will help you build a forecast that you can go out to investors to get that to get that fundraising. And what we've seen with clients is understanding your marketplace, conducting some research with customers, and really building that dynamic forecast will establish credibility with potential investors as you go out looking for funding if you have a successful clinical trial, be it phase 2 or phase 3, etc. So again, the risk of waiting is sometimes if you don't have that information, it'll be more difficult to even get the resources if you do have a positive trial in time to have a successful launch.
All right, another question. Are there specific points or milestones you suggest for reassessing your commercial forecast to ensure you have realistic objectives for the brand?
Yeah, well, so two come to mind for me is obviously clinical data readouts. That's one that could drive some decisions one way or the other. Also, given my role in an access role, I'm always thinking payers, but payers are budgeting and forecasting 12 to 18 months ahead of time. So that's a key. That's also a key milestone from my perspective that you need to consider.
Yeah, and I've recommended to clients, after a phase 3 and their trial data is out, to do a very in-depth quantitative demand study to really shape your forecast to ensure that you are developing a forecast that has attainable goals. And I think that's a very important aspect of building your go-to-market plan, is in establishing a forecast that we really truly believe we can hit with in that specific marketplace.
Another question here. What is the role of reimbursement in pricing?
So I think it's a
I think
critical
that's
role.
your question, Jack.
Yeah, it's a it's a critical role. If you don't get the price right or the reimbursement is not there, you are not going to succeed. It's almost 100% if you don't get both of those right. Pricing. I gave some examples of some situations where pricing worked and where pricing didn't and there was some other factors that supported that, but it's pricing's critical to get early indications on bands or where it's gonna fit. And there's different ways you can do that. You need to do interviews and assess the decision makers, what their perspective is from a coverage perspective, as an example, or you can do some value based pricing analysis. There's a number of different ways you can look at that, but it's extremely important because you're going to need to have evidence to support why you priced it that way. Um, if you're in a space where you're pricing high, believe me, I mentioned ICER, Institute for Clinical Effectiveness Review. They're gonna review your product, and you don't want to be dinged and create a reason for the decision makers to block or not cover or create access barriers. So that's from a pricing perspective. And then reimbursement, it's critical to have a path for reimbursement. There's a lot of complexities in the reimbursement space. It's constantly changing with policies, but if you don't have a code to get reimbursed, then you're not going to get used. The product's not going to get used, even if it's the greatest.
Another
So
question here. Can you speak to acute care critical launches or special nuances in launching in the hospital space?
yeah, I
Yeah, I
can.
think I could take this, and Jay, feel free to add in your comments. Within the hospital space, it is a bit more challenging to launch in the hospital space than it is a primary care product. We've seen a number of hospital-based products not reach their milestones and their launch goals over the past 5 to 10 years. I think that's just due to a number of challenges in terms of the customers that you engage with. I think it's working with hospital systems and IDNs and developing a value proposition for those customers are a bit more challenging than it is to discuss and create a value prop for PBM customers. I think in addition to that, the actual development of a market shaping plan and creating an urgency to treat for physicians and providers within this space is also a bit more challenging. So I think in terms of trying to overcome that, really understanding your patient profiles and your physician profiles and building out a stakeholder engagement plan pre-launch, 12 to 18 months prior to the approval, and then really starting those discussions early are very important to establishing credibility both with providers, but then also establishing relationships and hopefully getting those contracts with IDNs as you get approved.
Yeah, I would agree with what you said, Santosh. The hospital market is very complex. Our healthcare in the U.S. is complex, but the hospital market is very complex with different players, different contracting strategies, different health systems being measured according to different quality measures and reimbursement decisions. And the only thing I'd add is just making sure you're segmenting to those different categories. Whether it's if the hospital's linked to a health system or they're not. Just understanding what those nuances are, categorizing, almost archetyping those groups or segmenting those groups to ensure that you're addressing their needs because they're going to be different. A Kaiser or a Geisinger is very different than another system that's just individually on their own. So ensuring that you understand that when you're going to market is important.
All right, more questions here. The next one. What are the best strategies or practices to mitigate the lack of differentiation?
Well, I can start, Santosh, and I attempted to speak to some of this earlier, but it's not easy. I'll just state that it's not easy. If you can get agreement to look at data, because I do believe each product has some level of differentiation, but it requires a bit of strategy and work to get to what that is. If it's a specific patient population or a specific characteristic that you have to uncover, the Paxil CR one was an example that I mentioned. There was another one that I was involved in where it was in benign prostate condition, and in the time, people didn't believe that was an issue, and we were able to analyze data to show that it was the second most common issue for males, and then we were able to look at it from that perspective, and I believe it was the second most common cancer also, and so it became a very important disease to treat. So Again, it's not easy. Requires quite a bit of investigation and direction in terms of looking at the data. If you can't get alignment or not able to do that, then you're going to likely need to play more on a pricing, contracting, or maybe more of a patient support program. You're going to have to look for other avenues to be different from your competition.
Santosh, did you have anything to add there, or should I move to the next question?
No, I think we can move to the next question.
All right. Next question. What's your perspective on pricing for therapeutics that are designed as a single dose?
Okay, so I don't know if that's for more of a cell and gene therapy question, but I'd say it's still evolving area. I think focusing on value. I've probably mentioned value a few different times, but value is extremely important. If a health plan is going to pay today for a benefit that is a lifetime or 5 years or over a period of time, there's got to be a way to show that value. Obviously, value-based contracting is being looked at. There's different models being considered. It's really challenging in our healthcare environment and to be able to make those work. But I'd say that's probably the first place to start in terms of ensuring that you can demonstrate the value, but then also creating a way that the health plan or the decision maker doesn't feel like they're taking on all the risk for no benefit down the road. And again, that's easier said than done. It requires a bit of strategy to work through to get to that point, and obviously getting the team aligned, the internal team aligned according to that is challenging as well. But that's the way things are going today. I guess we'll see how it continues to evolve over time.
All right, we have time for one final question. We had a lot of great questions today and couldn't get to them all, but we will try our best to get back to everyone who submitted personally after the webinar. So for this last question, with more biotechs going it alone to the market, are you seeing an increased reliance on CSOs and a phased launch approach?
Yes. So with more biotechs going at it alone, actually, what the trend that I'm seeing is a reliance on outsourcing your full commercial organization. And this outsourced commercialization, 15, 20 years ago, it was outsourcing your clinical organization. 5 to 10 years ago, it was outsourcing your sales organization, and now organizations are becoming more willing to outsource their whole home office team, and that includes marketing, market access, sales, medical affairs. And this provides a lot more flexibility for clients that are executing an outsourced commercialization strategy. But in terms of the question on clinical sales organizations, yes, we are seeing a reliance on CSOs and a phase launch approach related to CSOs. We also are seeing contracts put in place where CSOs could flip over to full-time to the client after a certain time period as well. So there's ways to structure your team to ensure that all of the critical deliverables are being executed while you are being conservative in terms of the full-time resources that are in place within your organization.
Yeah, I mean, it helps lower the risk, and it helps lower the investment, and it can stage it out over time. So I think where we are seeing it, and I think we will continue to see that trend as I mentioned earlier, there's an increasing the number of small to mid-sized companies launching their first product. So I think we'll continue to see that trend.
All right. Thank you for answering those questions. And for our listeners, please feel free to contact Herspiegel Consulting through this contact information that you see on the screen. Thank you for attending this Fierce Biotech webinar and submitting so many great questions. I'd like to thank our speakers for participating and Herspiegel Consulting for presenting today's webinar. This webinar has been recorded. You will be able to access the recording within 24 hours using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. Thank you again for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.